Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is an executive, entrepreneur, inventor, researcher, consultant, trainer, and coach. He is the developer of the Cybernetic Transposition and Shared Vision Leadership Systems. He has trained more than 100,000 people around the world, including heads of state, Fortune 500 CEOs, and more. He is the author of several books, including his newest, Make Your Life a 10. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stuart Lichtman.
Hi, Matt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited for us to dive in because we met. I know a little bit about your work and it is so deep. There's so many different ways that we could go, but I just love for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Let them know about some of your work and life experiences, and then we'll dive into the amazing book that you wrote.
I'm really happy that your program addresses spiritual side of things as well, so I might as well start there. When I was about 28, which was about 50 odd years ago, 54 years ago, I had near-death experience. I was clinically dead for 8 minutes, which people tell me you shouldn't survive. And PET scans had black spots all over them, and they dire comments. I met God, which is, you can't use words to describe it. They're so inadequate, but it was filled with loving joy, and there was a real temptation to stay there. I was given the choice of staying there or coming back to do what I had karmically chosen to do this lifetime. And I decided to come back. What I'd chosen to do this lifetime was 2 things. Number one, teach people to transcend the worldly Luciferian junk that we live in all the time, and to help the species survive what we're now encountering. I have perfected the first, and that's described in my book, Make Your Life a 10, early out. It pretty well describes exactly what it teaches people to do, which is to achieve those seemingly impossible things that they need to achieve in order to make their life a paradise on earth. Now, what can I say? In the last 10 years of my online coaching program, where I can get really good statistics, I have a 31 questionnaire from which I get those. 100%, literally, of the students who do at least most of the assigned work achieve their first seemingly impossible objective. So things like finding a perfect partner, making a lot of money, losing weight, whatever is important to them that they think is a missing link. And I have a process that creates a roadmap to making their life a 10. So that interests you at all?
Yeah, well, I love that. And we discussed a little bit at the beginning and I'd love for you to speak about it here, where you have the near-death experience, you meet God, and then you get this download, and then you start writing. And this is the process that you teach in the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is some 42 years on. Actually, I got the download, and being an entrepreneur at heart, I put together a training the next month for 250 people. First trial was not so good. Only 67% achieved their seemingly impossible objective. But I tuned it up over the years and it stayed in 100% for the past 10. I'd like your audience to just think what it would take in their life for it to be really a 10. Now, given our society, the first thing that a lot of people say is lots of money. That ain't it. What would the money give you that would make your life perfect? So you might say, gee, I'd like to have a perfect partner. Let me tell you about mine. I developed the process in Sweden 35 years ago. One of my Swedish ex-wife's friends kept getting these bad relationships where she was very smart and the guys were intimidated by her, and they would end up psychologically abusing her. And it was the same, she'd get a new one, it was the same person in a different face. So I said to her, Katrina, I'm going to help you. So I developed this process, and 2 weeks later, she met a guy who, wouldn't meet him. She'd been working with him for 7 years and never thought of him as a partner material. They've now been married since then. They have kids, they built a house together. They have an idyllic life. I use that to find my wife. The first step in that, which might be of use to your audience, make a list of the characteristics of each someone in your life at any point, in any context, that you'd like to have in your perfect partner. It might have been somebody when you were a kid, or it might be somebody right now, not necessarily somebody you had a relationship with. Maybe it was a boss, or maybe it was a teacher. But the key is to hone in on the examples of what you'd really like in a perfect partner. I ended up with 32 items, and I kind of chuckle. One is pretty obvious for me, which is he had to be a successful entrepreneur. Another, you remember the movie Mary Poppins? Did you ever see that?
When I was younger, yeah.
You remember she has a special ruler that she measures herself with, and her height is practically perfect in every way. That was one of my characteristics, practically perfect in every way. And in fact, my wife is. And we've been together for 17 years. And can you believe that every day gets better? It's just wonderful. So that's one of the things specifically I teach. Another one is surveys show people are exhausted. They prefer working at home because they can work in a way that puts less stress on them. I can empathize with that. I've done that. I've run companies from home, almost 100 of them, for venture capitalists and otherwise. I like it a whole lot better. Now, I have a technique that empowers them to accomplish their work in half the time with better results. That'd be pretty good, huh?
Yeah, you're gonna have to tell us that one.
Okay, it's really pretty simple. Our unconscious runs everything, our unconscious mind. The conscious mind is able to handle maybe 3 things at once. I think there are a few people in the world you can count on one hand who can handle 4 or 5 things at once. Let me give you an example. Look at the corner of your room. okay? And you see length, width, and height. You can comprehend those three dimensions at once, right? Now try to experience in the same way your room at midnight and at 7 in the morning. Not flip-flop, flip-flop, but concurrently, the way you can see all points on the line. I have yet to meet anybody who can do that. And that's only 4 dimensions. Now, if you look at the world from a cybernetic point of view, any situation has millions of alternatives embodied in it. So millions versus 3 or 4. Obviously, the conscious mind can't comprehend the world. The unconscious, on the other hand, which uses a brain, which consists of 200 billion analog and digital computers connected by approximately 7 trillion interconnections, is ideally suited to the world. And in fact, the way we use it, the unconscious, is a part of us that does the using. We create unconscious habit patterns. Let me give you an example. Ever watched a kid learn to read? Or do you remember when you learned to read? It is probably more magnificent achievement than anything else you'll ever do in your life. I mean, first they have to learn that certain sounds are meaningful as opposed to other unmeaningful sounds. Then they have to learn what those meaningful sounds are associated with: people, action, things, and so forth. Then they have to learn to pronounce them properly. Then they have to learn that certain squiggles on paper have meaning, and that those are called letters, and that each letter has a sound associated with it, or several sounds. And then they have to learn that some groups of these squiggles match the words that they have verbally learned. At that point, they're at the first stage in reading. Now that took about 3 or 4 years to get to. Amazing. So now you look at a book and you look at it and you know what it says, because in all of these steps, you created a series of discrete unconscious habit patterns that do the decoding and tell your conscious mind what it's about. Most people don't remember learning to read, but I'll bet you can remember learning to drive a car. Now, when I learned to drive a car, at those days, you had to have a parent go down to the agency, as was living in Washington, D.C., and certify that you were 16 years old, and I got a learner's permit. And my father, we went out to the car, my father opened the passenger seat and said, "You drive." I was scared witless. Every little action was unfamiliar. Every little movement of the steering wheel. How much pressure do you apply to the brake to stop smoothly? How do you take a turn? What's the appropriate clipping point as I land? The point where the car is closest to the curb. I used to race sports cars, so I had to turn from that. And you have to learn all these things, and it takes immense concentration. I was just soaked with sweat by the time we got home. Luckily, I didn't hit anything. Now, I drive now, and basically it's automatic. And I'll bet it is for you too. You think, what happened during the day and so forth. What's different is that you created unconscious habit patterns to do each of the things involved in driving. Now, this is a long-winded way of getting to how you complete your work in half the time. We never forget these unconscious habit patterns. You know, they say, once you've learned to ride a bicycle, you'll never forget. We don't forget these unconscious habit patterns, even though some of them are wildly out of date and useless. They still are taking your unconscious time. So when you try to estimate how long it takes you, how long it will take you to do something, you probably really miss the mark. Most people do. They underestimate the time it takes because the unconscious is estimating how long it would take if you didn't have all of these time-wasted habits going on. And then you miss that estimate because they are going on. I used to run a lot of companies, and I would have tech companies, and I'd have people give me estimates of how long a project would take. And they were always off, but I did something that might be useful to anybody who runs something. I kept a log of their estimated completion time versus the actual completion time, the duration. And I found that any person had a consistent error. A very common error would be about 1.35. You take their estimated time, multiply by 1.35, and you have a good estimate. So I got venture capitalists used to be my client, a lot of my clients, and they would say, Stu, how do you possibly get good estimates when nobody else with these startup ventures can do it? And I would tell them. And that was the way. What I did was to simply compensate for the amount of time they wasted. Now, I was doing a project for the Swedish government, and the Minister of Education had an assistant who was being worn down to nothing. He was working 7 days a week, an average of 10 hours a day. During the week, it'd be more like 13. And I said, you know, you're going to burn out. You got to do something better. And he said, you know what? I'll do it. So I invented this process. It involves going into the unconscious, finding the habit patterns that are stealing your time, and changing them to habit patterns that are productive. And so not only do you save the time, but you become much more productive on top of that. And with my students, about half the time with better results as the usual. Make sense?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding it correctly, what you're going to do is you're going to take a minute, go into the subconscious mind, and basically find all your time wasters. And then with that, you're going to flip it from time wasting into something that's very productive. So I'd love for you to tell me if that's correct. But I also wanted to mention the one thing that came up for me when you were speaking about that is Parkinson's law, which basically says that the task is going to take as long as you think it's going to take. So if you think it's going to take 10 days, and you set that as a deadline. And I don't know if I'm butchering Parkinson's law, so go look it up for yourself. But it'll take 10 days or more. But if you say I'm going to get this done in 5 days, then you have a better chance of actually getting it done for 5 days. And if you give it like 9 years, right, or no time in it at all, it's just going to kind of keep going and going. So it's important for you to actually set a deadline and commit to hitting it. And that's going to allow you to get your work done a lot quicker.
Yeah, in fact, that is one of the essential characteristics of my system. You have to, here's what most people do. You ever seen one of these kid things where there's a donkey and the person riding it is only a carrot on a string in front of the donkey?
Yeah.
Donkey's never going to reach it, right? But if you were to plant that hole in the ground, the donkey would be successful in reaching it. Most of us are the first, and one of the characteristics of what I teach is having very specific objectives that are time-based and otherwise explicitly measurable, so you know where you are. So yeah, it's that you just mentioned, right on track.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of your work, it really delves into the subconscious mind. And so I kind of want to go a few different directions with this, but I'd love for you to start with what the definition of cybernetic transposition is. And then your book, there's a lot to cover. I'm just curious if you can start to lay out that framework, because each thing in your book, and you can go check it out, every chapter has a practical application. And that's what I was sharing with you at the beginning, where there's a practical application. There's a formula that you can implement and understand, and then you can look at if you're getting those results or not. And then you can, modify your process, or just at least take a look and see where you're going wrong or where you're not applying it. So I'd love for you to touch on that.
Sure. You covered a lot of territory, and I don't remember the first point you made. Would you repeat it?
The first part was the cybernetic transposition.
Okay,
If
yeah.
you can define that for us.
When I was at MIT, I used to see Norbert Wiener, the inventor of cybernetics, wandering the halls. He was a prototypical absent-minded professor, and he had thick glasses. But if you look closely, you can see him looking at the pretty girls going by like that. He lost his car once a week rather. He kept calling the police saying it was stolen, and he'd just forgotten where he parked it. He came up with cybernetics, which is a way of dealing with the complexity of the world, of modeling it from a technical point of view, and I'm not going to try to go into that. But what I stole from him was the name of one of his books, which is The Human Use of Human Beings, which is pretty well describes what I'm involved in. Now, transposition is this. I decided at the age of 83 to learn to play golf. I've never been good at sports at all. And my instructor, who was a really good guy, kept saying, well, you do it the way you do it in baseball. You ever play baseball? Nope. And he kept coming up with analogies. You could take this and that. Unfortunately, I didn't have those at hand. So then he showed me videos, slowed down, of people doing what he was talking about. And I could then feel it and grasp it and so on. Now, I'm not saying I'm any kind of a decent golf player, but at least I learned something. Transposition means taking a success in one part of your life and transposing it to creating a success in another part of your life. And for example, what he was trying to do was take a success playing baseball and transpose it to a certain aspect of hitting a golf ball. Now, in my system, I have what I call a success team. Let me see, what's the best way to describe it? When I was at MIT, the most I could afford as a car was an old clapped out VW Bug. Remember, I don't know whether you're old enough to remember the one with the little oval rear windows.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I had one of those.
Classic Bug, yeah.
Didn't have a heater, didn't work. So in those cold Cambridge days, it was pretty unpleasant. But what was more unpleasant was that my parents lived in Washington, D.C. And this is before the interstate highways. So there are a lot of big grades and big descents in the road. And the only way my little VW could keep up any speed would be I'd floor it at the top of the hill and hold my foot on the floor until I ran out of energy. If I had slowed down, I had to pull over into the side and go up in first gear because it didn't have enough power. Well, most people, a lot of people at least, don't have enough what I call success power. That means, in my terminology, they don't have enough power to transcend self-defeating unconscious habit patterns without resolving them. Now, I have great techniques for resolving them, but you take a movie like The Secret, my friend Joe Vitale and people like that, they have a great deal of success power. And they think about something they want and just happen. Otherwise known as they're lucky, because luck is unconsciously generated success. So I said, good. So what we need to do is develop a technique to be unconsciously successful to a much greater extent. And I developed this technique of building what I call a success team. You take your 7 greatest successes from anywhere in your life. Now, got to be careful about this. It's what is for you your greatest successes, not what somebody else would say are your greatest successes. So for me, for example, I have over here on my left a whole lot of potted plants. And for a long time, I was the kiss of death on plants. No matter what I did, they die. Now these plants have been with me for years and years. That's one of my great successes. Finding my wife, Gloria, is one of my great successes. And I heard from a friend in England that Margaret Thatcher, when she was prime minister, had just given a speech in the House of Commons saying, we need to do something about the British economy. It's lacking. I wrote her a 1.5-page letter, and 2 weeks later, I had a $500,000 contract, which resulted in some more spectacular results. But those were some of my great successes. They're great successes from my perspective. So you take your 7 greatest successes, then you take your 7 greatest failures, the ones you don't even want to think about, you cringe when you think about them, and using a technique I call the base reframing, or another technique I call subpersonal negotiation, you change that failure into an unconscious habit pattern that creates the opposite, a great success. So somebody might have, I had a client who had a smoking habit that he knew was bad for him, but more than that, it irritated his lungs and his coughing, and he hated that. And that was a self-defeating unconscious habit pattern. You know, he'd get uptight, he'd grab a cigarette and light it. So we changed that to when he got uptight, he just walked over, got a cup of coffee and a donut, which his employer kept around. And on the home, no more smoking. And a very much happier guy. Now, so you can take your great failures and turn them into great successes, because you think about it, in order to create a great failure, you have to know the opposite of that. What's a great success? Otherwise, you couldn't create the opposite. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So that, since the subpersonality, part of the unconscious, already knows the opposite, it's easy to switch them to the opposite, great success, in a situation where previously the great failure. So you take the 7 subpersonality success, you take the 7 reprogrammed success subpersonality, put them together into a team, and then, here's one that I have as an exercise for my students. I say to them, pick a place that you're going where it's really difficult to find a parking space. Then imagine somebody pulling out just so you get there, and leaving you a perfect parking space. And just give that to your success team and say, please create this. You know what? They get anywhere from 95 to 100% success rate. Nobody lower than 95. And you can do things like that. And that is an empowerment with a success team. And then if you use your success team as part of achieving an objective, like on or before, where are we now? On or before June 15th, 2023, I will have done whatever is necessary and appropriate with the support, full effective support of my success team, to have generated an extra $53,500, as evidenced by the balance in my checking account. I would do that in ways that are for the highest good of me and of all concerned. And that is an actual objective that I've set, that other people have set and achieved. You want an extra 53.5?
Sure. Yeah, I'd take that any day.
Yeah. Well, you've got the tools, read the book and follow. I mean, literally, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The steps, do them, and an event. Now, it's important when you set an objective with my technique that you absolutely don't put in how you're going to achieve it. Because when you put the how in there, you have so limited the number of alternatives to only way you can consciously think of, that it makes it much, much more difficult to achieve. So
Yeah. And when you're sharing that technique, it's interesting because I've only heard of one technique that's very similar. The person that shared it called it the blink technique, and they framed what you're sharing a little bit differently. They basically were saying that when you have these negative experiences, especially traumatic experiences, it's a charge in the body, a very negative charge. And for you to heal that, or at least neutralize it, you can put on top the energy needed to overcome that. So let's say you had a really traumatic experience and what you need is love, compassion, or care, or to feel security. You find memories in your life where you had that, and then you merge the two memories to kind of neutralize the negative charge. And you could also build it up for positive charges. And so one of the interesting ways that he shared was for public speaking, because most, you just use as example, because a lot of people are very afraid of public speaking, is to think about all the qualities and characteristics that you would need to deliver a phenomenal public speech. And then we went through them one by one, and then found the energies and experiences in our life that we had that would have those qualities, and then imagine us speaking. And it was interesting to kind of dive into the memory system, into the subconscious mind, and bring up the energies, bring up the tools that we already had to apply it to a specific scenario. So it's not the exact same, but it's the only technique I've ever heard that was close to that. That was the only person I've ever heard share a technique like
my
that.
hat's off to him. Look, the genesis of my stuff is spirit. I mean, my job was to make it operational, but I never thought about this stuff. And I think he has the same author, spirit, and it is not unlikely. There's some people I know who have tapped into that and who misused it. And I don't think I'll mention their names, but they're very familiar to you.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I can tell you for sure that's where this person got it from. His stuff was very fascinating, and I would listen to it and I'd be like, this is pretty crazy stuff. And the way that he got it, he said he got into a car accident and he kept having seizures, and he said he got taken to this other realm. And he's like, all I was doing was taking the stuff that I was learning from this realm in this higher state, and he believes, and many other people believe, the pineal gland got activated, similar to a near-death experience, and you're going and you have this overwhelming, unspeakable information, right? So the challenge to going to that space, which I've been blessed to go to a couple times, is that how do you bring it back? It's just it's a whole new language. It's like you take a goldfish out and then you show them all of human language, and everything is like, here, goldfish, here's how to do this thing, or like a squirrel or something, here's how you start a car, or how the car works, to come back to squirrel consciousness and to articulate it. It's, it was there and it was true, but to bring it back down and, as you said, make it functional, make it applicable, is a huge challenge. So hats off to you for figuring that out. So it's interesting that you're able to pick up on that, and that ended up being true. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the book, because you go into a very simple process: creating your wish list, formatting your objective, translating your CT, which is those words that you use. I have to, and then and then it kind of goes on from there. So this is something very practical the audience could go through, right, and then apply to their own life. And I see what you're sharing here as an advanced law of attraction that has application principles. One of the beefs I had with the law of attraction stuff was always, what do you want? You know what I mean? Everyone wants money in this, but they never got clear on what was important. And then it just stayed into the mental realm, right? I'm just going to visualize this, and this is going to happen, where you need more than that for it to actually come true. You know, you need to remove the limitations, like your limiting beliefs and self-doubts and self-sabotage. But very few people I know can just go and meditate it and it's going to come in. There needs to be this holistic balance of your being to create a profound result.
I agree. That's a nice statement of it. Would you feel comfortable telling me the name of this other person you mentioned?
Yeah, Corey Herder.
Got to write that down.
And he's a fascinating character too, because when I came across his work, he had 600 YouTube videos and he just deleted them about, 6 months later, then created another channel with hundreds of videos, deleted that one. So he, interestingly, and when I'm doing coaching, I bring him up as an example because he has no problem reinventing himself because he knows exactly how the sequence of creation works. He's able to rebuild it from scratch every time and doesn't hold on to the creation that he did in the past. It's always an evolution and starts from scratch and creates a new evolution. And I found him because I had another friend in Toronto that I met, and he got hit on a bike when he was a kid, and he used Corey to help build his memory back because he lost all of his memory. And these two specialized in finding people that could help them rebuild their memory. And that's where all of their work, it expanded from that basic idea that they needed to have the memory back from this traumatic brain injury that they both experienced.
That's an interesting perspective. I take a slightly different one. I take what I was given and keep improving it until I get the message from Spirit. That's it. Change gears, do something else. And so I write books and so forth. I wrote an early version of CT, Cybernetic Transposition, in 2021. And I sold it for $97. And well, that's good. As an entrepreneur, it gave me $6 million profit. Then I said, okay, in teaching my trainees for so long, I can write a much better version of that book that will be much easier to follow, and I'll sell it for a very low price so more people can get it. And that's what we have. Ta-da. I like the cover. Make your life a 10. I have a Fiverr artist who did the cover for me. So we're given this, and some of us choose to use it for the upliftment of mankind, and some don't. I prefer to associate with the former. We were on a line before. I'm sorry, I got.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying, and just what I was sharing before is I like the practical application of the book, and you outline simple steps. So the wish list, and it's interesting because you start with this basically a bucket list, and so many people that I've talked to, whether it's friends, I meet people randomly in the world, or I'm doing a coaching scenario, very few people have ever created a bucket list, thought about what their life would look unimpeded by their current limitations, whether it's money, time, whatever the case is. And so you need to entertain that thought, and not just entertain it, but really contemplate on it so we can get past those material desires, right? It's like, oh, I want all this money. Well, if you had all the money and you got the nicest car and you're, flying in a private jet even, and that's all nice. But if you're doing it by yourself and you don't have quality relationships, you don't have the balance of other very important factors in your life, it's going to be all for nothing. It's what the money can do and give you. That's the thing that you really want. And so I think it's great that your formula starts with that inquiry, and then you build off that to help people say, hey, what would your life be out of 10? Absolutely perfect. And here are some building blocks to begin the process of creation. And I think you've laid it out pretty well.
Thank you. Yeah, I've known some very wealthy, very unhappy people in my life. I had a fellow that I tried to emulate when I was a kid named Jerry Woolman. Jerry Woolman had come from a very poor, economically very poor background in Pennsylvania. He got married very young. He and his wife hiked to Washington, D.C. He was very good with his hands building things so he could get work with builders. And he then became an entrepreneur builder, and he built many thousands of garden apartments. And then he built the John Hancock building in Chicago, and he bought the Philadelphia Eagles. And then what was this example of what I'm about to describe would have crushed most people. He used the top architectural firm and architectural engineering firm to work out the foundation of the John Hancock building. And when it got up to the 5th story, they found that the caissons anchored to the bedrock had big gaps, 5-10-foot gaps in them. And if he'd continued, the building would have collapsed. And he, like many entrepreneurs, didn't have extra cash. He didn't have the money to rebuild the building, so he sold it to John Hancock. Now, that would have crushed a lot of people. In fact, that forced him to sell the Eagles and a hockey team he had bought, and so forth. That would have crushed people. Jerry had this really sunny disposition, and somebody wrote a book about him. I think it was called The Wealthiest Man in the World. And it said, the wealth is not in money, it's in the experience of your life. He had a wonderful wife, kids, etc. It is interesting the illusions that are perpetrated in the world about power and money and so forth. I watched some editions of The Billionaire on television. I couldn't take it anymore. It was too real. And it showed some of the ethos. Then I look at Bill Gates taking his fortune from building Microsoft and doing good work, backing companies who invent ways to bring good water to these far-flung little villages in Africa, inventing ways to keep medications cold for 60 days without any power. Those are the kind of people that I think are the models for the world I'd like to see. And anybody can be like that. You don't have to have lots of money. It's just shaping your personality to be what you want to be. We can do lots of things that seem impossible. Let me give you an example. I guess it was now about almost 6 years ago. I had previously had a ventricular fibrillation heart attack. My father is a cardiologist. He called that sudden death heart attack. It manifested itself. I couldn't get breath like that for minutes. I called the EMTs. They quickly came, and for some reason they couldn't find anything wrong. I pleaded with them, take me to the hospital. They ignored me. I was almost dead. I managed to climb up on the gurneys that take me to the hospital. They did. And when I got there, the resident in the emergency room looked at me, slapped an oxygen mask on me, and showed me my EKG, an electrocardiogram that goes like that. Mine was equilateral triangle. Never seen anything like it. Now, that was so stupid on the part of the EMTs that it wasn't stupidity, it was karma. I'm firmly convinced. And Spirit told me, yeah, that was it. It was a test to see whether you were determined to stick around or not. Because I could easily have died, chosen to die. I had a very good cardiologist in Santa Barbara where I was living then, and he retired, unfortunately. And I was lazy about getting a replacement. But I noticed climbing up the stairs to my bedroom was getting harder and harder. So I was afraid it might be something with my heart. But I found a new cardiologist using my techniques, found a really good one. And he did an echocardiogram, which is kind of like a sonar look at the heart. And the technician said to me, this is really strange. I can't see the heart. There's so much fluid in the way. Zippo, the cardiologist, got me to a pulmonologist, a chest man, and he stuck a needle into my back, into my lung, and pulled out a water glass of fluid. And I immediately felt a lot better. He said, glad you feel better, but we got to get you in the hospital because this looks like it might be cancer. So I spent the next 3 days going through an operation, I forget what it's called, where they both do a biopsy and drain the fluid. And indeed, I have stage 4 lung cancer. I created, that is, I used my technique to bring in my life a really great oncologist who walked in third day in the hospital and said to me, Stu, you got stage 4 lung cancer. I'm your oncologist if you want me. I said to him, after checking with my success team, I said, that's great. You can be a member of my team as long as we agree I'm in charge. And I will do things that probably seem nutty to you. Will you go along with them? Says, as long as they're not destructive, yeah, for sure. That was my first test. My second test was, his name was David Hoffman. I said, may I call you David? He said, sure. See, that test, there are a lot of doctors who hide behind the title doctor. And when you ask them that question, they blanch. So if the guy has enough confidence for me to call him David, good, that's best number 2. Anyway, I was going through the fusion therapy, chemotherapy, heavy-duty chemotherapy, and looking at other alternatives when Spirit said, and I'm paraphrasing, Stu, you teach people to do impossible things. Check your own resources. At that instant, I remembered something my spiritual teacher told me 30 years before. And he said, there is a part of the body that builds and controls the body. When the egg and sperm meet and make a new cell, have you ever thought of what mechanism determines whether to be an eye cell or toenail cell? I said, no. He said, well, it's what I call the basic cell. And it builds the body and then has a responsibility for it. Check with your basics. I remember that. So I did. And I said to them, I have male and female. And I said to them, how do I heal this cancer? Can you do it? And they said, sure, no problem. And so they told me, number one, remember when you read this book by the Simonons 40 years ago about healing cancer? They said that all cancers have an underlying grief type of experience that's unresolved. And they had said it within the past 6 to 18 months. Well, what my basics said, forget the 6 to 18 months. You've got to go back through your whole life and find all the people where you have residual negativity of experiences and use your techniques to turn those into positive understanding, empathy with the people, and loving joy. And I did that. Then they said, you have to talk with us every day and we'll give you day-to-day instructions. I said, anything else? They said, yeah, you ought to talk to a woman named Alicia Hayes, who works with archangels. There's a healing archangel. Pull that into the mix. So I did. Its name is Miriah. And the effect of doing these three things is that going from having a tumor taking up 45% of my left lung to having absolutely no tumor took 4 weeks. And
Wow.
my oncologist, who is a really top guy, a professor of oncology and so on, said, wow, that's amazing. He said, with your type of cancer, it's very unusual, almost non-existent to get this kind of spontaneous remission. And I just smiled, because it wasn't spontaneous remission. We can do things like that. And I keep getting these karmic challenges. And with karmic challenges, I get, when I recover in the process, I get the type of insight that you were talking about, Corey got when he had these things. So I've had 6 chances to die this lifetime. I mean, 2 of them, I was on the other side. And this last one, my job is to come up with an implementation of a way to save the world, because we're heading toward Armageddon, but I'm not ready to talk about that. I think that God gave us such a spectacular array of abilities and resources that I've tried to put in my little book here. If you follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, exactly what I described, you're getting not only the original source material, but what I've determined about the application of it with 100,000 other people. It works, and it works to the extent you can read the book and do it. And with the book, I give them also the buyers also an audiobook version, because I know if they listen to the audiobook while reading, the rate of learning will be much higher. They get 14 applications specific of the basic techniques, like doing your work in half the time with better results, and so on. Find your perfect partner, find your perfect job. The idea is that here's something that doesn't cost much. I'm giving away hundreds of dollars worth of stuff with it. All you have to do is sign up and it come right to you in digital form. And hopefully I'm on the track of helping a lot of people live a paradise on earth.
Well, that's amazing. And it's a very exciting proposition. It's fascinating because some of the techniques that you're sharing, I've only heard a couple of times in all of my years of personal development and self-help work, and going into everything from personal development into the weird esoteric. And so there's definitely something to it. I appreciate you coming on the show and bringing back this knowledge and sharing it with so many different people. Your book, in the way that it's laid out, is very action and detail oriented, which I love. So you can go, go through the steps, try it. If it doesn't work, doesn't work. But what if it does work? You know what I mean? And what do you need to do to refine it? So you can go and apply the material and get a result. And that's what I really like about it, is it's practical, and you can go do something about it now. It's not just mystical thinking, which is nice too, but it's not as practical as I like. Is there anything else that you wish that we talked about, or you'd like to leave the listeners with before we close the show?
I want to thank you for doing this. There are lots of things that I've come up with and other people have come up with that allow people to transcend the negativity of the world. I call it Lucifer. And if you don't get it out there, they don't have a chance of using it. So my take is you're committed to getting it out there, and I really appreciate you for that.
Well, thank you. Yep, I'm definitely committed to doing my best to get out good information that can help people improve the quality of their lives, improve their connection with God, and then ultimately their family, their friends, and empower the world. Where can people find you, where they can get the book, and they want to stay in touch with their work, with your work? Where do they go?
Okay, they can get the book on Amazon. Just Make Your Life a 10 is the easiest way to find it. If they want to find out more about me, they can go to www.stuartlichtman.com. It's all lowercase, no spaces. And if there are contact email addresses, you can contact me that way. Indirectly, you can reach me through social media, but I say indirectly because I'm not a social media type. So I have a woman who handles social media for me. I do look at messages on LinkedIn. And occasionally I get one that's interesting, and I probably answer about 10% of them, because most of them are trying to sell me something that I don't want.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. So I'm quite easily reachable, and I hope that when I publish my next book, you'll let me come back and join you.
Yeah, well, that one sounds very fascinating as well. I know you didn't want to touch on it today, but it's a very fascinating title and topic. So thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.